You know those moments when you're feeling stuck? You just can't come up with a good video idea and it's hard to gain any traction. But then randomly, for whatever reason, that perfect idea just hits. So you race off to your computer and get started right away. You stay up all night, you plan, you script, and you come up with the perfect shot list to get that cinematic style. But then when it comes down to the shoot day, well, this happens. He doesn't have a dog. I know this feeling all too well. But what if I told you that the entire scene you just watched was filmed solo? And what if I told you that you could do this too? And I'm gonna show you how by sharing a few tips and tricks that I've learned over the years that I like to use when creating scenes like this all on my own. And I'm also gonna break down this scene so that you can see all of these tips and tricks in action. So let's get into it. Hey, what's happening? My name is Ryan, and if you're new with us, welcome. I truly appreciate you being here. If you've been following the channel for some time, you probably know that there is a narrative style to the way I do my tutorials, very story driven. And so I thought I would share with you how I'm doing that when creating scenes like this all on my own. But before we get into that, there's just a couple things. Number one, I'm not feeling that well. You could probably hear it in my voice, so I'm gonna do my best to keep the energy up today. The second thing is that this is kind of a part 2 of another video I did. That was more of the basic cinematography tips and techniques. I'll link that down below if you're interested in learning more about that. But in this video, I mainly just wanted to focus on the creative side of this whole thing. And I'm really excited to get into it. So let's get into some of the creative tips and tricks that I like to use when getting a scene like this. The first is to change the perspective. Now, with a tripod, we usually are gonna get maybe a wide, a medium, and a close-up. This is probably something you've heard before and is something that you should definitely practice when you're making a scene, but I'm not gonna get into that. What I'm gonna mainly be talking about is creatively changing the perspective. Now, I did this a lot in the sequence where I have this top down, another one I did with my feet as I'm walking, and another with the phone here. I just did a high angle with the perspective of the phone in the foreground. This definitely can help to kind of break things up from the norm and create a little bit more interest as we're driving the narrative forward in this sequence. Another creative technique that I like to use is just creating movement. But again, most of us probably don't have a slider or something like that. We usually just have our tripod, so how do we create movement? Well, there is a technique that I used for this video, but we're gonna talk about that a little bit later in the breakdown. But another thing that I like to do is to create keyframes. In Premiere Pro, all I do is create a keyframe at the beginning of the clip and one at the end of the clip, and then I just adjust the scale from 100 to something like 104 or 106 just to give it a slow push in or pull out. And I did this quite a bit in this video, and I do it in a lot of my other videos as well. It just creates a little bit of movement. Now, not to say a static shot couldn't have a lot of impact. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of static shots that do, but those usually have a purpose, and there are a few examples that I could give you, but definitely go and watch some of your favorite movies and you'll notice some of the static shots that they have in there. They're there to make an impact. They're there for a reason. Another creative thing that I like to do is to use color. Now, most of the time when we're filming by ourselves, we're doing everything, so we're not thinking about color often, at least I'm not. But lately I've been trying to play around with color a lot, especially in this shot here where I wanted to create night. And we're gonna break that down in how I did it, but essentially all I did was create a color contrast. Basically what color contrast is when you take two opposite sides of the color wheel and you put them together. Because they're opposite, they create contrast. You do this with black and white as well. That is also contrast or highlights and shadows. Moving on though to transitions. I didn't do a whole lot of fancy transitions in this one, and that's just because I did that in my last video about cinematic transitions, but I did do a match dissolve in this video here because I wanted it to feel like this character has been here for a while working on this idea, and to kind of further push that comedic aspect at the end, make it more of an impact when his buddy who was supposed to help him backs out at the last minute. We've all been there before. Another thing I like to do is get creative with my lighting and my audio. Now, I'm not gonna go too deep into lighting, and I paired these two on purpose for that fact. And that's because I talk a lot about lighting on this channel. As a matter of fact, I have a whole playlist for lighting and cinematography. I'll definitely link that down below if you'd like to learn more about that. But what I like to do is get creative with my angles and my color temperature and things like that. I did that a lot in this intro scene. I even used hard light. I didn't even use a softbox on the sunset lighting that was on my face here. You know, in this scene, I just bounced light off of the ceiling, which we're gonna get into that whole breakdown later. But Anyway, but with audio is 50% of your viewer's experience. You probably heard me say this before if you've been watching the channel for some time. I heard this quote from a filmmaker recently in an interview, and it was something like this, and I'm paraphrasing here. Go and watch a scene from your favorite movie, turn off the sound, and experience it that way. Then do the same thing, but turn off the visuals and turn up the sound. And it's almost an even better experience because now your mind is creatively creating this scene just from the audio. And the audio you could feel, the visuals you see, and they work together to create what I call a cinematic experience. And this sequence, this intro scene was no different. I just took my camera, which already had my Sennheiser MKE600. This worked out really well. I just turned the camera on, pressed record, and I tracked all of my audio for all of the scenes after I shot them. It's one simple way of doing it. If you don't have an FX3 or an XLR mic, you could use your phone. You can do this without a lot of gear. And to that point, I do this a lot. Like I will use things like, blackout curtains for my negative fill, or this unbleached muslin fabric that I got on Amazon for 10 bucks as diffusion. I use this project card that I got from the grocery store. You really don't need a whole lot to make a scene like this, which is something that I tried to do in this scene here, which I'm super excited to break down for you. So let's hop into breaking down that scene so you can see all of these tips and tricks in action. Starting with the gear that I used. First, I used the Sony FX3 and the Sony 24-70 G Master lens. Now, you don't have to use this camera setup. You could just use whatever you have. And as a matter of fact, I got this comment recently where someone asked me to do a video like this with an entry-level camera, and I do plan on making that video. I'm just trying to figure out which entry-level camera I want to use. If you have any thoughts on that, please leave those thoughts down in the comments below. But beyond that, I'm using the Freewell ND magnetic system with the glow mist on top of that. That's just a stylistic choice. You don't have to use it. I just like the halation that it gives off in the lights, and it kind of gives more of that film look that I'm going for with my videos. For this video, I'm mainly only using 2 lights. I did use a third in one scene, but I'm mainly only using 2, and those 2 are the Molus B200 and the Molus B300, made by ZHIYUN. Now, ZHIYUN isn't sponsoring this video, but they did send me these lights to try out and see what I can create with them. In the B series, they have the 100, the 200, the 300, and the 500. I have the 2 and the 300, and I love them. These lights do everything that all the other lights do. They're super bright. They can go from 2700 Kelvin to 6500 Kelvin. They also have lighting effects like fire and lightning and things like that. Super lightweight, but super powerful. I didn't even have to put the 200 on a C-stand. I just had it on this Amazon Basics stand, and it worked out really well. A couple of unique things about these lights is, number one, it doesn't have a controller. However, you can use the app that they have. It's called ZHIYUN, and you can control all these lights from the app, which is kind of cool. I just can never remember to turn it on and sync everything, so I just like the controller personally. However, if you do want a controller, they do have separately the K1 wired controller. I have one of these. It just connects via USB, but you don't need them, and that's a really cool perk. There was one instance where the fan was just a little bit too loud, but that was because I had it at 100% and the light was working really hard. It really wasn't that bad. You're not gonna hear it, especially in a video like this. You're not gonna hear that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, my key light is the B300. I have it at 50%. I haven't heard the fan once. Maybe it's turned on, I don't know. And also, this is what it looks like, so there you go. In my personal opinion, most of the gear out there that's new, that's coming out these days, a lot of these lights are gonna be fantastic. There are some that are brighter than others. There are some that have a different tint than others. There are some that don't come with a Bowens mount, which most of us use. But you just kind of have to weigh all that stuff out, do your research, do some cross-reference. That's what I do before buying anything. Make sure that you love it first. These lights work really well if you're a solo filmmaker, YouTuber, someone who's just getting started in all of this and you're looking to invest in your first video light. I would highly recommend these, and that's because how much you can do at an affordable price. So if you're looking to purchase your first light or even your next light, I highly recommend checking out the B series, and I just want to give a huge thank you to ZHIYUN. Other than that, I just use the C-stand and Amazon Basics light stand and a few modifiers here and there, just keeping it as simple as possible. So let's hop into breaking down that scene so you can see all of these tips and tricks in action. Starting with this opener top-down view. In order to get this top-down, I used a C-stand. So I realized that not everybody has a C-stand. I actually did the same shot with a tripod, and it looked okay, but it wasn't exactly what I was looking for. I really wanted this top-down view. I'm not sponsored by any of the C-stand companies out there. I just truly believe in them. If you're a solo filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, or any kind of filmmaker, or you're a YouTuber, I highly recommend getting a C-stand. So I I had this grip head and this pin. The pin had a 1/4-20 thread on it, so I was able to thread the FX3 on that. And then I just pulled it up into the air, and there you have this shot. This lighting that I have, this sliver of light that I have here on my face, that was with the Molus B200 at 2700 Kelvin, and I think I had it at 2%. It was super bright already, and this is just harsh lighting. It had the reflector cone to kind of direct that light a little bit, and then I just closed the curtains to kind of make this sliver of light on my face. And again, I wanted for the audience, for the viewer, to focus more on the facial expressions. And then I added some keyframes for a little bit of movement, and that's this shot here. Then I just did what's called a cut on action. You start with the first shot, you cut mid action, and to the second shot, the character is finishing that action. To light this scene, I still have the backlight, which is the Molus B200 at 2%. I brought that down a bit, but to the side of me is the Molus 300, and I had that at around 10%, I believe, and I had this softbox, the 6090 on it. Now, if you notice, I'm using my emulated sunlight to motivate this key light here with the 6090, and I have that at 2700 Kelvin to match that light. And that is just to light up my face just a little bit more and light up that area just a little bit more. Okay, beyond there, I just open up the curtains. The only reason why I did that is because I actually filmed the scene where I'm walking to the table the day before, and the curtains were already open, and I got the idea for this couch scene the next day, and that's when I shot it. I needed a reason for the curtains to be open, and that's the only reason why, is just to push the narrative along. Anyway, going into this scene where I'm walking, so this is where things get really creative, but also I'm gonna use a lot of caution when showing you how I did this, and I don't recommend it. What I did was I put my Sony FX3 on my tripod and I flipped it upside down, and I just held it in front of me. Now, here are a few things before you start trying this out. Please hear me out on this. Number one, do not try this at all unless you know for sure that your camera is 100% locked into your tripod and it's not going anywhere, and that you're comfortable with this maneuver. I think I tried it maybe like 20 or 30 times before I actually got the shot I wanted, and even before that, I practiced a lot without the camera just to make sure that I was even able to do this. My tripod locks into my camera super well, and it just worked out really well for me. It is a really cool creative shot though, and it's a way to add some movement into the shot. I noticed that when I loaded this in to Premiere Pro, it flipped it on its own. I didn't even notice it actually at first, but if it doesn't do it automatically, all you have to do is flip it right side up and you're good to go. How I lit this is actually more important because this is a moving shot. So how do we do that without another person moving lights around? Well, I kept the sunlight, the Molus B200, behind me, and that also lit up the rug here and gave us that sliver of light, and that was kind of like my guide of where to walk. But I noticed that it was pretty dark, and so I just grabbed the 300 with the softbox, left it at the same settings, and just pointing it downward. It just helped to bring in light into that area, but it also gave it that natural roll off into the shadows as well. Okay, so now moving on to this table scene, which was actually the day before. I had the 200 set up the exact same way, same color temperature, same percentage of light, brightness. But what was different here is that I had the 300 above me. This is technically considered a table scene or dinner scene, that's what we would call it. I had the B300 on a C-stand. I pointed it downward, set it to 5600 Kelvin, and put that up in the air with a sandbag. We're gonna get through this. We're gonna get through this. So with the B300 in the air, I loved the way it looked, but it was creating too many shadows under my eyes, so I just tilted it forward a little bit. It lifted the shadows under my eyes and just gave it more of a pleasant look. When we switch over to the night scene, now again, that was just a match cut or a match dissolve, but the way I lit this one was very similar to the other one. I had my key light at the same exact position here. I positioned myself exactly the same. I left the camera exactly where it was, and basically what a match dissolve is the same as a match cut, except for it's not a hard cut. You add a dissolve in there, so you're basically stacking transitions. I have a whole video about this as well, and you get something that looks like this. So the way I lit it was I left the key light, I changed it to 4200 Kelvin, and then I switched my camera's white balance to 4200 Kelvin. The reason I did this is because I wanted our moonlight to look a little more blue, and I wanted to maintain the skin tones within our character. Natural moonlight in film and Hollywood and movies, it's usually represented in this cooler tone, and so that's what I decided to go for here, because again, we're going for that cinematic look or something that looks and feels like a movie. For our emulated moonlight, I just moved it over to the side and I pointed it towards the windowsill here, and I set that to 6500 Kelvin. I only had it at 1%, which was still way too bright. So I had to bring the ND filter down on my camera, and I had to bring up the brightness on my key light. Because I did that, the whole room became too dark, and so I needed to fill in the room a little bit, so I actually had to add one more light, and that is just the Molus X60, this little 60-watt light that you've probably seen me use plenty of times. I've even done a one light video on this. Definitely check that out if you're looking into just one 60-watt light and seeing all that you could do with it. That's a really good video to get you started. But I used this and set it to 6500 Kelvin and just bounced that off the wall to kind of bring up this living room area. All right, so now going into the next day, this next morning scene. Now this is where things get creative, but also super simple. And I did this just to show that you don't need a whole lot, especially if you're shooting in the middle of the day. You don't have to get super stylistic with all of your shots. You could just keep it simple and it still looks great. Now, the one thing I did add here was a little bit of haze, and that's just because, you know, this was supposed to represent the next day. It's supposed to feel different than the night before. I also didn't like the way this wide shot looked without the haze. I don't know, just for some reason, because it's such a wide shot, you can't put in a ton of lights here. And so it just felt right to me. This is just a stylistic choice. You don't have to do this. But anyway, other than that, I just used one light. For this first shot, all I did was set up this chair over by the window to light up the sweater and the scene itself. I backlit it and that was it. So for this wide shot, I needed to expose for the window light. To do that, I used the B200 straight up at the ceiling, and that bounced off to light up the subject, me. Really worked well to light up my face. Actually, without this, it was super dark. So this worked out really well. And then I did another cut on action when I'm pulling out my phone into the kind of medium close up here. To light me up on this one, again, I just pointed the 200 at the ceiling and it just lit up my face here using the natural shadows on the shadow side of me as negative fill, and the window light just filled in the rest of the room naturally. So again, I just wanted to use this scene here to show you how easy this could be. You could do this, a scene like this, with just one light. It was super sunny that day, as you can see. It's almost high noon and I'm still able to expose for the window light. The natural window light in the room is filling in the rest of the room. There's a nice roll off on my face for not using a softbox. I think it turned out really well. This scene was super fun. I like making scenes like this for YouTube because I get to just be creative with what I have. And also too, I just want to show you that you could absolutely get this same look. Let me know what you think in the comments down below, and if there's anything you might have done differently. All of the tips and tricks in this video are all things that will elevate your work and help you to get that cinematic style look that you're going for. But the best piece of advice that I could give you is to just keep making videos, play them back, watch what you created, and go back and make it better in the next one. All the tips and tricks that we learned in this video are all things that I learned by just creating things, making mistakes, and trying again until it became like second nature to me. And to be completely transparent, I still do that. So as always on this channel, I just want to encourage you to take these tips, practice them often, and maybe apply a few of these things to your next video, and send me a link because I'd love to check that out. Well, that's gonna do it for me. Thank you so much for joining me in this video. If you liked this video or you learned something, please click the like button down below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and I'll catch you in the next one. Cheers, friend.